So hello, everybody, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today for Building Capacity in Families, Effective Approaches to Addressing Aggression. So my name is Catherine, and I am the Community Engagement Liaison with Adopt for Life, a not-for-profit charitable organization that provides peer support, community, education, advocacy, awareness to adoption, permanency, kinship, and customary care families across Ontario. We are so very honored to be here with the amazing AFCCA support team to share evidence-based strategies and practice-informed approaches to help build capacity with families. The importance of training and speaking with professionals has been on the top of the AFCCA's team mind for a very long time. Before we go ahead and share this webinar, I do want to take pause and acknowledge the lands that we are situated on today. I fully recognize that we are coming from all various parts of this beautiful province and maybe even beyond. I personally reside in the traditional territory of Anishinaabe, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, Ojibwe, and the Mississauga of the Credits people within Treaty 19, now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between First Nations as a first step towards improving our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures, to recognize and acknowledge the historic and ongoing devastating effects of colonialism and racism in the name of assimilation across Canada, and to consider how we each can, in our own way, action forward in a spirit of truth, reconciliation, and collaboration. We want this to be an engaging and interactive webinar, so please feel free to use the chat function that you see for any tech-related issues. I will try my absolute best to help troubleshoot with you if you have comments or you'd like engage with the content itself. If you do have specific questions, we ask that you can use the Q&A feature on the Zoom platform, and you will have the option of asking anonymously if preferred. We do want to let you know that this is being recorded. However, we will be mindful of sharing the names that are asking questions, and we ask that you be mindful of sharing any identifying information of families or minors that you may be speaking about. There is going to be a specific time at the end of this presentation to ask questions. So please feel free to ask as it goes, and we will address them when possible. This video, like I said, is being recorded, and you will receive a copy of this video as well as a copy of the slides in the coming days. So with that said, I'm going to turn things over to the AFCCA team. I'm going to turn my camera off, but I absolutely am going to be here in the background. So ladies, thanks so much.
Thanks, Catherine. Good morning, everyone. It has been a really odd morning for us, so we're probably going to take a few minutes to kind of get into the groove here. We are in the Ottawa and Montreal area today, and if anyone has been noticing, there's an ice storm, so neither of us are presenting where we expected to present from because there's all sorts of internet issues for us. So it's been a scrambly kind of morning for us. Anyway, we are here, and ironically, this is called Weathering the Storm. I hadn't even included that until just now. So yeah, we really want to help. We've been focused on how to address the complex issues of aggression towards families and caregivers in childhood and adolescence, or AFCCA is what we're calling it, and Mo's going to explain that. So we're really grateful that you're here, and yeah, we just started about 6 months ago. And give me a second, my computer, it takes a moment to kind of catch up when I get started here. Thinking it's gonna go to another slide soon. And oh, there we go. All right. So this is the team that started at the end of last summer. And only a couple of us are here today. So I'm going to introduce the people who aren't here as well. So Nancy Lockwood is the most amazing human being. Both Maud and I have worked with her before. She is our co-director and practice lead, and she Oh, how many things. She's has an education background. She is just a beautiful human being, and lives supports someone living with numerous people living with neurodiversity, um, close and afar. She's just an incredible supporter and lover of people. Jen Drudge is our AFCCA parent liaison. So she is also a parent, an adoptive parent. In fact, everyone in our team are adoptive parents except myself, who is an adoptee. And Jen Drudge has a family of 6 to birth children and 4 adopted children. She's created an amazing family, and she is an incredible support to our families and to us. I am Tanya Eichler. I am a therapist in the Ottawa area. I come with about 15 years of experience working in the FASD realm and loving working with families who support people with FASD. I have a private practice here. Nancy Mode and I were part of a team that created a program called Feed Alcohol Resource Program in Ottawa. And now we're getting to work together again with this AFCCA family support team. So I'm going to let you introduce yourself, Mode.
Thank you, Tanya. Good morning, everyone. So yes, I was also in private practice with Tanya before. I'm a psychotherapist and social worker. I also specialize in fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, neurodiversity, children and youth who are coming from adoption, the foster care system. I'm also a parent of 5 kids, so they're all teens now. So I always say, you know, it keeps it busy. And 3 of them came to me by adoption. So I also have the lived experience of all the challenges that an adoptive parent can experience. And I was also, I decided to do my PhD on fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. And in the process, we realized that there's a lot of families who have been experiencing aggression from their children. And even you can switch to the next slide if you want, Tanya. So basically during COVID, we started interviewing families who have youth with FASD and asking them about their experience. And what we were hearing was really concerning. A lot of young people were quite dysregulated by, you know, reduction of services, no longer being able to go to school, the parents not being supported through respite and other services that were there previously. But at the same time, we were hearing that this was an issue that existed even before COVID, but that had not been addressed properly or enough, I would say. So we started looking at what other countries are doing with this issue, because we're not the only one in Canada experiencing AFCCA. So in the US, not in the US, but in the UK, they call it CPVA, Child to Parent Violence and Aggression. And you may have heard this term before, because this is what Adopt for Life was using. But increasingly, there was young people who are displaying AFCCA or who were displaying AFCCA saying, you know, it doesn't feel respectful. Therapists were saying that as well. So we thought, okay, we need to find a different name. So in partnership with Kids Mind Health Network, that's the research network that I'm involved with in my PhD. They have the expertise in neurodiversity and fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. We made a partnership with Adopt for Life and created the first national consortium on AFCCA. And the first step was nationally understanding what's the issue that the parents are experiencing, the young people, and also how to call it, how to address it. So what we came up with is AFCCA, Aggression Towards Family and Caregivers During Childhood and Adolescence, because we don't want to stigmatize further children and youth who are displaying AFCCA, because they do that in the context of either neurodiversity, trauma, and lots of very complex issues. So we do that out of support and care, and we also want to be careful about not saying that all people with neurodiversity are aggressive, but it's certainly something that happens in this context, and that needs to be talked about and supported. We also heard from parents because they were saying, I mean, they shared very difficult stories. Like, they will come to see us full of bruises and say, you need to give me help. Like, it's really hard. And what we often heard from all over the country is that they often felt blame. The first step was often an assessment to see if they were fit as parents, and then they were not given any services. And that's something that we kept on hearing throughout the country, actually, and a lot of parents having to relinquish their parental rights. So if you want to know more about the consortium, we have a website. We'll show the slides after, and we're keeping hearing about families, and we're really working in collaboration with them to understand how best support them and support their young people. So that's AFCCA. What we also heard from them is it's often directed towards the parent or the caregiver. And our understanding is that often it's the attachment relationship that makes it difficult because of the child's self-regulation issues, difficulties with co-regulation, accepting that co-regulation. A lot of these children were coming from a place of trauma, attachment difficulties. So that was often happening in the home rather than outside the home. But not always. Sometimes it was also directed towards school staff, support staff of any kind, and also happening in the community. We also included, that happens somewhere, self-harm or threat to self-harm, because sometimes that, and we're not talking about someone who's anxious, doesn't hurt anyone else, but would, have self-injurious behaviors. We're talking about more of a pattern where the young person is highly controlling because of their anxiety, because of their neurodiversity, attachment needs, and they would say, if you don't do this, I will, cut myself, or they will make that kind of threats, and that's very stressful for family members. So you can see here that there's also like the emotional, psychological harm towards the parents. There's more research happening on what parents experience when AFCCA happens in the home. We have someone here in Quebec, Karen Tremblay. She has this whole new concept. It's called filiation trauma de filiation, and it's basically talking about a very different kind of trauma. Like sometimes we talk about PTSD, we talk about vicarious trauma, which happens when you're, let's say, a social worker and you see a lot of difficult, situation, then you can become traumatized. But when you were talking about a parent, you're talking about not being able to be away from that child because you don't have any respite. You also have parental responsibilities. A lot of parents were saying, we were assessed as being competent, good parents by the system, and then we feel like we're failing and we're being blamed to sort of fail. I'm not calling this a failure, but I'm just saying that's how it feels like because of the response and also because of the stigma attached to it. They also talked about financial issues because sometimes one of the parents is no longer able to work. Sometimes even the second parent is being threatened to, okay, maybe you won't be able to keep this job because you're gone all the time. You're managing crisis. People working from home. The young person can barge in constantly and interrupt their meetings. They also talked about physical injury. We have parents who had even life-threatening situation severe injury, needing surgery, being in the hospital, and they still have to go back home and care for their child. We're talking about siblings being traumatized, so the trauma for a parent to feel like you need to protect one child over the other is very traumatic. And that's also their role as parents. Like, where do they feel like they are living their values as parents? Like, often parents, they come into this journey thinking, okay, here's the kind of family I will create. This is what I want to teach to my kids. And then when reality hits and you have a child who displays AFCA, oftentimes families say, I don't feel like I live according to my values. That's not the parent I wanted to be, because they end up either giving in too often by fear of retaliation, or they escalate too, because they're humans, and at some point it can only being called those names or hit for so long without any reaction. So this is usually what AFCA looks like in families: physical aggression, name calling, threats. And for some, it's very intense. For some people, it's every day. For some people, it's cyclical. And it's okay, Tanya, you can switch to the next one. And like I said before, it usually happens in the context of neurocomplexity. So we have yet to see children, a child who has no diagnosis, and even ADHD is there, but in the consortium was always ADHD with attachment issues, with lots of anxiety. Like, it was never like just ADHD. It was usually very complex situation. And we also saw that people with autism were giving a lot more services than people with FASD. So in our AFCA program, we see a lot of families raising young people with FASD. I think they're the ones, falling through the crack probably more. And maybe there's more misunderstanding around this diagnosis. Yeah, and why children use aggression? I'm very passionate about this. I could stay on that slide for like 2 days. Okay, we are really interested in like understanding, like, okay, why is there's aggression, for this child? And sometimes we're looking at, okay, can we change the behavior for this child, or is it possible or not? So we will look at different elements of why this child is using aggression. But it always comes down to one thing: it's the self-regulation difficulties in the child. So self-regulation difficulties then can stem from many other reasons. So for example, attachment issues can lead to difficulties for the child to accept the parental co-regulation. Their brains are formed differently, so it will be difficult for them to regulate themselves. Sometimes there's an abuse history. So I've seen children, they, for example, they were not accepting the male figure in their life because they have been abused by males. And so just by doing this trauma therapy, we were able to work that out, and then there was no more aggression. Sometimes it's the developmental age. So we know that children who grow up in foster care, if there's neglect and abuse, developmental trauma, then we can expect them to be younger developmentally. So sometimes we see children who use aggression or aggressive behaviors longer, and then sometimes that decreases over time, not always. Often we see anxiety. There's a lot of anxiety for these children, and also in FASD. The things that I think we may not think about as much is the child's perception. And I don't know, I became more aware of that aspect. I don't know for you, Tanya, but like we realize, like, when you start asking questions to the young person, you realize that they are seeing things quite differently. The way they will interpret a situation is not necessarily accurate to what happened, but that's their truth. That's exactly what they're seeing. So if you have internalized that adults are not protective, adults are there to, like, basically just say no all the time, and they don't mean well, then your response is not going to be like, oh yeah, I'll accept your no because you're so caring, you know. So that perception, that's just an example where we see it over and over, how that sometimes leads to aggression because they're not able to accept no, or accept the boundaries that are in place for their safety, care, and protection. So we have to work on that perception for them to realize, yes, adults, most adults are there to care and protect them. Unfortunately, that's not always the case in our children's history. Another one, modeling. So peers, what they're watching on TV. I am not saying that, okay, if they have a FASD, then they watch something, then they'll become aggressive. No, but that certainly plays a role from a research perspective. That's what we see. Priming is another one, the last one I'm going to talk about. So that's basically at some point, so I gave this example last time. Let's say I step on Tanya's foot, I'll be like, ooh, okay, sorry. You know, I'm not even thinking, okay, I stepped on her foot, I need to say sorry. I just say sorry because I've been primed to say sorry. Like, my brain's not even thinking. Tanya, are you having a hard time with the...
Sorry. I have no idea why that just happened.
Okay. I'll let you figure out and keep talking. And then, yes, and I see Vicky's question about aggressive script, and I think I'll cover that then. Yeah, so basically it's like you're primed to do something. So if the child, like, the response every time you say no is like hitting or saying something like name calling you, then that becomes entrenched and it's just going to happen more. So sometimes we just need to break that pattern. Aggressive script is that it's very similar to what I was saying in terms of the perception. So if they've heard quite often, okay, you know what, if he does this, I'm just gonna punch him. And this is the kind of script that they have in their mind, and it's been normalized in their mind through peers, through maybe other adults that cared in their life, through movies, and that all becomes reinforced. Then they have those aggressive script in their mind that they think that's normal, that's a normal and acceptable behavior. Quite often you won't see a child that has like one element. It is usually like their self-regulation issues will stem from the shame they experienced through their abuse, their aggressive script, the modeling that happened in the past, their developmental age that's a bit younger, the anxiety, attachment issues, and that makes the storm. You know, when we're talking about the storm, the tornado that can happen, that's where it comes from. So sometimes it's hard to solve. Okay, did you figure out your PowerPoint issues?
Yeah, I'm good. I just wanted to add, though, that the part on the other side of this slide is really important. And I think it's what we're addressing and what we're trying to address, because sometimes, because of the complexity, we can't, traditionally, I think our systems try to look at how do we change the child's behavior. And obviously it's what parents want to look at as well. But sometimes that's actually not what can be changed. And I think in our program, we've been focusing on what actually can be changed, and that's what we're going to focus on here. Should I go to the next?
Yes, because that's exactly it. Great transition, Tanya.
Thank you.
Yes, and honestly, when we did the consortium and they came up with that question, okay, we're going to ask parents what they want. I'm like, they're all going to say, I want to change my child's behavior. And many of them didn't. They said, my child's so complex, I don't know that we can change, you know, all the behaviors that they have. Like, sometimes it does. Like, if both of us have seen it in our private practice, where sometimes we don't necessarily expect that the child will stop using aggression, and sometimes they stop for whatever reason. They're all very unique, and sometimes they don't. So like Tanya said, we focus on what can be changed. And this family here, like, teach us to walk in the storm of instead of trying to avoid it. So what does that mean? It means learning de-escalation techniques. It means learning different ways to communicate with that child. How can you improve safety in your family? Improve your attachment. So there's many other things that they wanted to see improvement in. And one thing that's not there, but that we work on with NVR, nonviolent resistance, which I will explain later, is for the parent to feel empowered and feeling supported with more people around them, reducing the isolation, but also feeling like they're living according to their own values as a parent. And that sounds bizarre maybe now, but we'll explain that more. Okay, and if you want more information on the consortium, some of it is translated if you speak French. So you can go on that website, and yes, we'll send a PowerPoint, so you'll have the info. There will be more coming, awareness campaign, because we all feel like the word on AFCCA needs to be out. There just needs to be more awareness on this issue. Okay, and that's all. I think you're next after this.
Yeah, this is your last one for now.
Okay, a tornado in the family. So this is a metaphor that we, I kind of thought of it. I ran it by the group and they liked it. So basically we're trying to externalize the issue of AFCCA. So we didn't want to point the finger at the child. We wanted to explain, okay, there's many things that can make up a storm. So when we're talking about AFCCA, we are often using the storm or the tornado in the family. So in every family, there's wind being inappropriate, difficult behaviors that children experience, but not like every family has wind, but not every family has a tornado, which is AFCCA. And tornado leaves trauma behind. It will traumatize the siblings, the parents, the pets, whoever's witnessing it. And when a tornado hits a home, which can be damaged, physically, literally, and also like emotionally, we need supporters. We need to pull in people to help. Like, we can't think of a neighbor, with their house being destroyed and they go like, okay, you're on your own, right? Like, when we're thinking of a tornado hitting a home, we're thinking of, okay, we need to rally around this family and help them recover and think of a safety plan for next time, because there might be a next time. So yeah, so you'll see throughout the presentation, we're trying to work with that metaphor. That's also part of reducing stigma.
Okay, so when we started this program, I mean, we just were creating from the ground up. And I just wanted to explain, I'm not going to go into everything about this slide, but I'm going to explain just the concept that we came up with is kind of leveling what's happening in the family. So we have a 3-level approach. Level 1 means maybe the family has experienced AFCCA in the past. There's a threat of AFCCA happening. Things are starting to look a little difficult, and maybe there's some aggressive language, or there's stuff happening, but people overall feel like things are currently safe, but they need some support. So there's some supports that we've been offering, just some online resources and things like that, some trainings like this to help support. Level 2, we see actual, there's aggression starting. Things are starting to become entrenched. There's certain patterns that are happening in the relationship between the parents and the child, and we'll kind of talk about those a little later. And so we've developed groups and other supports for people when they're at that level 2 place. Level 3 is when things are more of a crisis. People are being hurt. Families are at risk of breaking down. Kids may be being hospitalized. There's a lot of things are really intense and in crisis. We have a lot of all of these families. In fact, we have identified just in our adoption program, Adopt for Life program across Ontario, well over 400 families just in 6 months have been identified. Those are people who have admitted to saying that there's AFCCA in their home. And the more this becomes understood, the more people are weekly signing up into our program for help. So it's a pretty, now that word is out and people have started talking about it, it's becoming pretty intense. And the honest truth is we are 1.5 FTEs in this program across Ontario. So there's a lot for us to try to support. This one's yours, Mode. Oh, you're muted.
Right. And I don't use this usually, but I'm not in my house, like she said, weathering the storm as much as I can. So family adaptation and resilience, that's a model from Patterson, and this was used for families who are trying to adapt to a child who has severe medical complexity. And we thought of using this to kind of conceptualize, but also think about some of the families that we interact with, that we support. And we thought we would introduce it today, and Tanya is going to describe a case for you using this balance. So it's basically what creates the crisis is that when a family has the demands becomes higher than the support. That's kind of an obvious one, but anyhow. So what we're trying to do is rebalance the scale. So let's say a family is adopting, they have like their own coping behavior they had before. Maybe they've developed resilience through other difficulties they had before. They would go through all those trainings. We try to prepare them for, the adoption. Try to have to tell them to have a support system in place, and then the child gets to the family. There's a lot of stressor in the adaptation, daily challenges, and going back to work, all that. And then the child starts behaving with sometimes aggression, and sometimes the demands become so big that creates the crisis. Well, I should go like this if we're using the scale. And we have to also think of equity seeking groups. So if you have someone who's also Black, for example, or the child's Black or Indigenous, and they feel like, I don't know, do I want to call the police in certain situation, or they're going through microaggression because of systemic racism, for example, that may add to the demands or the stressor in their life. So that's also a component that we have to keep in mind. And for both Caucasian, but we really try to understand these added complexities for a lot of the families. At the same time, we have to say that some of these families and equity-seeking groups also have lots of protective and resiliency factors that other groups don't have, because sometimes they understand raising a child in communities, the way they're doing things might be different than westernized concept, and that's actually sometimes very protective. So it's not just a stressor, that could also be in the other side of the scale. So I'll let you do the case study to explain it, Tanya.
Okay, so this is just, I'm going to be reading this out. This is just a case study that I came up with. It is not obviously one of our cases. It's just grabbed different ideas from many different cases that we work with, but I think you'll hear, if you work with people like with families like this is not an unusual level or case. So Cindy and John are adoptive parents. They have 2 bio children who are in their late teens. They've fostered children for 15 years, have taken many courses in parenting children who have experienced trauma and attachment issues. They adopted Charlie and Nevaeh when they were 5 and 2 years old. They are bio siblings who were removed when they were 9 months and 3 years old from a home where they experienced neglect due to their parents' addiction. They witnessed abuse they also witnessed abuse. After removal, they lived in 3 foster homes. Charlie and Nevaeh are now 12 and 9 years old. They both have ADHD diagnosis and are on medication to help, but Charlie's medication doesn't seem to address the severe impulsivity. Nevaeh does fairly well in school. She struggles with math, but has good grades and overall causes few problems in the classroom, although she has few, if any, friends. She attends school regularly. Charlie, however, struggles in all domains. He is extremely aggressive with his mother in particular and has shown serious aggression at school. Currently, he only attends 1 to 2 hours of school a day when they can get him to attend at all. His mother cannot work anymore because she has to be home with him or to be on call to pick him up from school during the day, which places the family under financial strain and means Cindy spends a great deal of time alone with him. He's now bigger than she is, and he has seriously injured her more than once. Cindy and John have become quite isolated in the past few years as their extended family and friends have stopped inviting them over, and they've stopped sharing what's really going on in their home. People have called CAS on them when they've heard Charlie melting down in public, and they've been investigated more than once, but they've never been offered supports as they're not been deemed a child protection concern. They have an FASD support worker who tries to help with school and has connected them to an FASD support group and some trainings. They've not yet been able to get an FASD assessment, and they're on that wait list. Cindy and John have had to call the police more than once during particularly dangerous meltdowns with mixed success. Sometimes Charlie calms down. The police have frequently been good with their child and then have proceeded to lecture them on how to manage. Twice when Charlie was not able to calm, they took him to the hospital where he waited for a very long time, was seen by a psychiatrist who made recommendations, but the recommendations were not followed through on, and they were sent home with a piece of paper making recommendations like try letting him spend time in the shower, as well as a feelings wheel and instructions on how to use empathetic statements like, I can see you're upset. They were not also told to attend a parenting class that teaches a circle of security, and were seen as not complying when they didn't go to the class because frankly, they've already taken that class. They've been offered financial help to get respite, but have no idea where to go for help. They're older children and they don't have the space or the energy to interview people and advertise and all of the things they would need to do. Their older children avoid coming home because they find it too stressful there. Their marriage is strained with the stress, exhaustion, and conflict they now have on how to manage Charlie's behavior. Cindy tends to give in to Charlie's demands to avoid explosions, and John is more authoritative and punishes Charlie. So if you think about that case, that is really, there's a lot of very typical components in that case. And you can see on the capabilities side, they have some useful supports. They have a lot of parenting experience. I mean, their older kids are doing really well in life. They've taken tons of parenting classes, and they have some understanding allies, like the FASD worker, and now they are in FASD support group. But they have, on the demand side, school difficulties. They're exhausted. They have their own trauma now, plus the trauma history from their children. They are now developing health problems. The system navigation is, and we hear this a lot, the system navigation is incredibly difficult for them. They have judgmental friends and family, which really hurts. And creates an isolation that actually exacerbates the problem. So there's a social isolation. There's the aggression. That is one of the demands, obviously. Neurodivergence and supporting the neurodivergence and trying to get accommodations for the neurodivergence. But then a lot of the services aren't a good fit. They are now they've developed financial strain. Oops. And so you can see that's not even all of it, but you can see how that balance really ends up getting way out of whack. And again, please see, this is not about parenting capacity. Their parenting capacity is extremely high. So many of the people I work with, I would consider better parents than myself. They just have so many complexities that they're trying to navigate, and it's so difficult. This one's yours, Maud. Oh, you're muted again.
Yeah, so we're coming with solutions that are not going to solve everything. Some of those issues are quite systemic, and that's why we have the consortium. That's why we'll create a committee of practice as well, so we can leverage our efforts to change some of these things. But when we're talking about families, There's a funding aspect that we tried to help at Adopt for Life with the peer RPL, regional parental liaison. And sometimes there's so many roadblocks. It's hard to navigate even for us. So like for parents, just getting post-adoption subsidies, sometimes it's very complicated in some regions. It don't make it easy at all. Some people don't even have respite and they have multiple children that they've adopted publicly. It's shocking. And we'll talk about the safe language later. That's a big component for them and how they can feel supported. Safe and respectful language around AFCCA. And we at Adopt for Life, we have a lot of peer support in place. So sometimes we match them with someone who's experiencing something similar in the moment or something that they have overcome. We have peer-led support group, and we have a Facebook page as well. And now Tanya and I added some clinical intervention. So we have clinical-led groups, support groups. And we have the polyvagal clinical intervention, and I'll let Tanya talk about it because she's so much better at this than I am. Same for neural de-escalation. And the nonviolent resistance is my, it's kind of like my thing, so I'll talk about it more, although Tanya is also trained in it. So when we started hearing about AFCCA, we thought, okay, what is the UK and other countries doing about this? Because they're talking about AFCCA. And we were told, it's not perfect, but it's the best we've got. That's NVR. And NVR is basically, it was an approach to oppression in society. It was not a family intervention. And that was developed as a family intervention in Israel, maybe about 20 years ago. It's an evidence-based intervention now. There's a really large body of research on it, clinical trials of all kinds. You can switch to the next slide. Oh, yeah. No, then, okay.
That's okay. Okay, we'll do it there. Yeah, we'll do it this way. So we'll just kind of give you a little bit more of an outline of each of those things. So polyvagal theory, for people who aren't familiar with it, Stephen Porges began, and I can't even remember when he started kind of studying and coming up with the concept of polyvagal theory. Deb Dana is one of the people who's kind of interpreted his and created a really user-friendly language around how to understand how your nervous system works to protect you. And what we find is a lot of our families, completely understandably, you have what becomes a threat in your family. AFCCA becomes a threat to you because it's violence, and our nervous system is made to protect us from violence. But it's so complex when it's your child who you're supposed to protect, and then you need protection from. That's such a complex concept. So we're using groups and teaching polyvagal theory just to help parents recover, because a lot of our parents get really stuck in that hypervigilant, sympathetic, and then they collapse into dorsal. And so that language, there's kind of Deb Dana created this language around there being 3 levels: ventral, vagal, sympathetic, and dorsal, and how we're responding in the world. And so we're trying to teach people how to move out of that sympathetic when they are safe, so they have some recovery and can regain a sense of self, because parents really lose that when they're walking this journey of AFCCA in their family. We're also learning about neuro de-escalation. So Christian Gödel is teaching us. He's a child and youth psychiatrist from Austria. And it's really, if people are familiar with kind of bottom-up brain work, it's really a way of trying to quickly de-escalate situations, or helping parents be okay to step in quickly before things really escalate. There's a lot to understand about this. The concept is that you're kind of trying to reach to the brain stem and calm from the brain, kind of interrupt the escalation. So it really depends on the parent being able to regulate their own nervous system. So that's part of why we start with polyvagal, so that kids can look at them and orient to their safety. Because if a parent can't create safety within themselves, they can't create safety for their child. And we always orient to who else is in the room when we're losing our marbles. And so that's why we really need to help parents be able to be okay in the face of their child losing their marbles. And so it's just some of the techniques are using distraction, some emotional or physical nourishment. It's just these really interesting distraction things, attuned to energy, an attuned energy level, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later, that can help lead kids to being more regulated and not lead them to being more dysregulated. Now, this is still being developed and translated in English. I think he's kind of got it working for him, but English is not his first language. He's training us, and it has not been all translated. So we've had one level of training in this. There is more to come, but it's still quite new, and we're excited about it. But we'd like more of it now. Anyway.
And the
Yeah.
yes, and what Tanya described is basically we want to help parents be able to self-regulate themselves as well. That's the idea of using polyvagal. Like if you're not able to regulate yourself, it's hard to regulate someone else. And I think most of them are very good self-regulator, but they've become traumatized by what's happening in the home. So at this point, some of them lose that capacity around that child, right? And sometimes there's multiple children in the home with this issue. So, okay, and then VR. And when you receive the PowerPoint, if you load that link here, that's where you could see all the research that has been done on NVR. It was even there was clinical trial even on foster parents, adoptive parents, all sorts of research. Anyway, that's my thing. It's very interesting. So if you want to understand part of the concept, I usually tell the story of Rosa Parks. She was a Black female in the States, and she was on the bus. A white male came up to her and said, "You have to give up your seat," and which she had to do at the time, and she refused. That's the concept we call active resistance. So she did not turn the other cheek. She did not turn to violence. She said no, right? And she actively resisted, which at the time did not go well for her. But then she joined forces with other people to fight the oppression and the control that was happening at that time in the country. And things change. So what does it have to do with what we're trying to do with families? So what happens in families who experience AFCCA, oftentimes children become extremely controlling of what's happening in the home. And they control that with some of the behaviors. And I don't want to sound blaming like, oh, the child's controlling. I mean, there's reasons why they do that, like trauma, attachment issues, anxiety, all that together. So, for example, the parents are not allowed to go in the young person's bedroom. They get to decide who's using the computer and when. There's not much rules around the use of Wi-Fi, for example. Sometimes they even make rules at some point for siblings. Are we able to invite people in our home? So that becomes very, very controlling. So that's when we say, okay, we need to have some active resistance, being able to set boundaries again, and rally supporters in order to do that. So we can switch to the next one. I don't like going into shame right away. We did that last time too, but. Yes, so AFCCA and shame. So what happens in families who experience AFCCA is at some point they become very isolated. Sometimes that's just the shame of what's happening. People would make so many comments like, oh, you should do this, you should do that. And it's hard for their self-esteem. It's hard to feel encouraged. And this is something that happens for most adoptive families, I think, foster families, like general population doesn't always know about what it can look like in the child's behaviors. You know, a child who has trauma or FASD, and sometimes, like, you know, it's invisible, so the child appears like they should be normal and act normal, and just if you say no, they should respect you. So that's really hard for the parents. So reducing shame for parents will mean for them to have a social support network, rally supporters, people who get it, people who will trust their parental capacities and help them trust it, people who know their truth. They will validate what they're doing, help them think through, because usually they're complex situations. They're like, even Tanya and I would, you know, all our experience, we're like, oh my gosh, what are they gonna do here? Like, it's complex. They're not like easy peasy lemon squeezy kind of a situation. Also learning about self-control strategies. Many of them will say, like, I'm at the end of my rope. Sometimes I can't control myself. That's very normal in their situation. So we want to give them tools to self-regulate during those moments of crisis, and even after, being able to recover more quickly from those situations, and living according to their own values. And what that means is, like, a lot of them will say, I did not think I would be that parent who, like, started screaming or said this, I regret it. I did not think I was going to be the parent who resents her child for days, you know, for certain things. But, you know, it becomes so hard that, yes, these things happen. So we want to empower them to go back to those values and feel pride in their reaction. So, for example, if there's an escalation, and yes, the child will say things and do certain things, but the parent is able to keep their cool, act a certain way, you know, not fire back, join in the escalation, then they will, you know, let's say the next day think, okay, yes, I was able to live by my values of nonviolence. I did not respond with violence. I did not respond with anger, you know, and that's when they feel like they live according to their values. And so shame is often felt when someone's feeling inadequate. So if the system's making feel inadequate, that will increase shame in the parent. And shame, what it looks like in the parent is not wanting to ask for help, being socially isolated, feeling withdrawn from the child's presence. So sometimes they're like, okay, that's child protection issues, there's attachment difficulties, but yes, it will happen. In AFCCA case, there will be attachment difficulties because it's just so difficult. So there's strategies to reduce that shame in the parent. And like I said, it's for us to use safe language. We will give more guidelines on it, building their self-control and validating their parental capacity, and empower them to feel like they live according to their own values. There's also a lot of strategies to reduce shame in the child, because most of these young people, when we ask them about their experience of displaying AFCCA when they were younger, that especially in the consortium, they said, you know, I just didn't know how to communicate what I needed. I didn't know how to communicate my anger. And they did feel like things were unfair. That was their perspective. So I wrote here mind reading. So you have, what we recommend to parents is, like, always state your intention. Always state why you're doing what you're doing. Maybe not when there's an escalation, but later. So because they're not reading our mind, they don't know our intention. And so that's important for them to understand our reasoning. The relationship gestures is part of NVR. So that's basically, sometimes Tanya used the love bomb. I think we're not supposed to use that, but I love that word.
Well, yeah, love bomb, it has become a negative thing in our society because of abuse. But actually, the way I like love bomb is it's little tiny love bombs of little tiny, I'm going to drop a little piece of love in your space and walk away. It's about maybe just saying, wow, your hair looks great today, and walking away, not expecting a response. It's genuine. It's the sort of thing that reminds you, it's the part of being a parent that you like to do. It's really important not to expect a response, because sometimes our kids can't handle the intensity of a lot of love or compliments. That can be too much. Might just be a little note, might just be bringing them their favorite drink from Tim Hortons. It might just be little things, and it's not about rewards. It's just about a little "I love you," bam, and walking away. That's what I call love bombs, which, yes, has now become a
And you're
negative thing
right.
in society.
It's not just for the child, it's for the parents to feel like, I'm a good parent, I did this for my child. That's what we want. And yes, it's not about expecting something in return. It's unilateral, it's little things here. Boop. And sometimes that really changes the vicious circle of like, there's a fight, there's no repair, and then like there's anger from both sides, and it just goes, they're going in a loop. And the rainbow basket, it's basically what we do in NVR is we have 3 baskets. The small basket, these are the behaviors that we will address. So for example, physical and verbal aggression, but we usually add one thing. So for example, when I was saying, the use of Wi-Fi unlimited, that might be something that the parents say, you know what, this one, it makes us feel like we're not living according to our values. We'll add that. Like they're getting back some control over what's happening in their home. And so usually, yes, like I said, it's the most important behaviors, aggressive behaviors. And you have one other thing that maybe not as important, but it does need to change. And then the other basket we might address, but not all the time. What we're also trying to avoid is that children with neurodevelopmental disorders, they are being told what to do constantly, or being told that they're not doing the right thing. And a lot of them, even if they were adopted very, very young, we realize that develop trauma over time by, the sensory issues, being bombarded with that all the time. And like, okay, you said this, you didn't do this, you forgot that. Then they go to school, it's the same thing. So that becomes like, that the microaggression that becomes developmental trauma actually for many of them. So go ahead.
Sorry, I was just thinking, I often think about how often do our neurodiverse kids with ADHD, kids like that, see angry faces, see faces that look disappointed in them. And those are like, because they haven't done things the way everyone around them wants them to do it. And so I think that's the part where it builds over time and develops a sense of, you're a bad kid. They internalize the idea that they can't do things right, and
Yeah, and I like Holly said, like writing a letter to the child that they can read in their own time. And it's like, even if AFCCA is so serious and there's very high conflict, like a long letter might be even too much. So we're saying like little things, and then you increase. And yeah, like you don't want the person even to give them a chance to respond. Like if you're in so much shame, and let's say I'm the child, Tanya's the mom, I walk past her and she says, oh, I love your hair. And I'll be like, oh, shut up, like if I'm mad or in shame. So we try to do it like very briefly so the person doesn't have to respond, but it still gets integrated at some point. Okay, and if there's, oh no, go back, because we forgot the most important thing from the webinar. If there's one thing you remember from this webinar, is the public opinion, okay? One thing we learned from the UK is violence thrives in secrecy. And most people, they've been burned by, their families, friends, the system, being blamed as parents. So they are isolated, and they are not talking about what's happening in the home anymore. So to reduce the shame, and even sometimes to reduce the violence and aggression, we want to make the behaviors known. Not, when I say public, I'm not talking about, social media and the newspaper. I'm talking about the family identifying people in their life that will be supportive of the child, young person, and also from the parents. And
that's the next slide. I'll get this one.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Keep going.
that's good. We're good because this is actually probably the thing we focus on the most. I think
Yeah.
this and I think we really need to address the fact that in our society loves independence. We actually kind of worship the concept of independence. And then when you add the isolation of independence, which is actually a ridiculous concept because we all depend on each other lots. And then you add in COVID, which really isolated so many families. That is really how this became such an obvious crisis that we can no longer ignore. But we're finding that trying to push against that isolation is really challenging. So yes, like Maud said, isolation creates more aggression, more shame, right? A parent who, when we're isolated and we're not hearing support, we are going to just hear the negative around us in our home of what our child is saying about us. It creates exhaustion and it's just a sense of I'm hopeless. It's overwhelming and that powerlessness. So community support, what we really want, we can help create that respite that our families desperately need and relationship for us and our kids. It can help with de-escalation, and we're going to talk probably a little more about this, but it's definitely going to come up in one of the videos that we're going to show you. But coming up with really creative ways to help our kids de-escalate, because kids often don't de-escalate for their kids. In fact, for the parents, they escalate with their parents, but sometimes they will de-escalate for others. And so there are a lot of creative ways we can invite others into the situation in the moment or afterwards that will help create de-escalation over time. Also understanding a connection for both the kids and the parents. When we have supporters, we're not wanting supporters that are going to come in and tell our kids off. We want supporters to come in and say, hey, I heard you had a really hard time the other day. We want this not to be a secret anymore. When we create a group of supporters, if there's an escalation, we tell them all. We say, hey, this happened the other day. And those supporters call our kids or text our kids and say, hey, heard you had a tough time. That's not so great. What can we do to help? Are you okay? Do you need anything? So it is supportive, but it's also acknowledging. And you can hear it's not shaming the child. It's accepting that things are tough for them, but also saying violence and aggression is not an acceptable way through this. And that really helps. Other people can come up with ideas and problem solving. It's one of the great things about our peer-to-peer groups, our peer support groups that we have. It's a buffer against adversity. So having someone else there or having someone else say, wow, Mom, I see how hard you're working, is like a huge breath of fresh air, because it's so easy when your child is aggressive to think, what did I do wrong? And it helps people feel supported and connected. Mo, this one's yours. And you're muted.
Do you want to do it?
Okay, sure.
No,
Well,
I can
yeah,
do it. I felt like you were on the flow. So
okay, it's the same. I mean, these are just different examples of how we create supporters, right? So, and we want supporters both for the parents or caregivers and for the child. It's really important to have both. So siblings can be social emotional supports, extended family members. What we want in a supporter is someone who can recognize or wants to learn more and is willing to walk alongside. If there are people who are being critical, or one of the worst things is when we have someone who sides with the child against the parent, those are people we need to absolutely eliminate from or really distance ourselves in this situation, because those are the situations that on that balancing scale, they're on the wrong side of the scale. They're not on the right side that's going to help balance things and make things go better. Family and friends are so incredibly important. And again, most of the families, when we start working with them, they have over time become so isolated. And they say, we don't have any family that talks to us anymore. or we really don't have any friends that have, like, that's a really common thing. So talking to friends and saying specifically, you know what, I really need you to do this. I need you to call me once in a while. I don't have the energy to call you, but I really would love to talk to you. So if you could call me, there's really specific instructions on how to help. Social workers absolutely can be helpful. And we need a lot of resources from social workers. We need social workers to understand that the parents that we're working with, these are, even though they look like they're in crisis and they might be reactive because they're exhausted and traumatized, they're amazing parents. I've not had a single parent that we've been supporting that is not an exceptional parent. So we need to come from that perspective, that these are people who are trying their best, but they don't know what to do anymore. And I really think the concept of it takes a village to raise a child, and with these children, it takes a bigger village, but we end up with smaller villages. That's really important to keep in mind. Teachers or EAs can be really, really helpful. Having good communication between the school and home is incredibly important because our kids do spend so much time at school, and a lot of them struggle. Or the other thing that can often happen is children can hold it together and do well at school, and then they let it all out at home. And so if the school knows that they're letting it out at home, it's really important for the school to say, okay, I heard last night you had a really hard time at home. And be able to kind of hold the child accountable and not say, they behave great here. Kind of like, what are you doing wrong? That can happen, and that can be really, really heartbreaking and destructive for parents. Extended family members, I love this too, can also help with cultural teaching skills, traditions, help self-esteem, even just fun things that they like to share. Having an uncle that likes to watch the same kind of movies and will watch the same kind of movie with you, or having someone that will play Minecraft with your kid once a week. Those sorts of things. You don't even have to be in the same city, but you can have that connection, and the child can feel connected to someone outside of their parents, which really matters. Our kids need to be liked by people outside of their immediate family. It's a huge resilience factor. And then friends, we can call on friends, and we can let friends know what's going on. And friends can be supportive to help kids do better. And church families and other worship, not church or worship communities, can really help with this sort of stuff as well. Yeah, worship and culture, all of those sorts of things, those communities can help a great deal. And things like bringing a meal over, or you know, having your kid over, or helping support your kid in a youth group or something like that. There's a lot of creative ways we can use these supporters.
So Tanya, someone that was asking, and we see that as well, like, what about families who say we have nobody wants to help anymore?
Absolutely. We absolutely see that. And actually that can be absolutely true, because sometimes the trust between family members, or there can be lots of different reasons. There's so many complex reasons in families. I think we need to believe that. You can ask, you can try, but if a family says there isn't anyone else in my family right now, you can see if there's some other creative things that people can do. Like maybe they can even take you out if you like being with them. There might be something. We can offer some education for a family to help shift them if they're seeing things, seeing a bad kid or bad parenting and not understanding the complexity. We're super willing to send resources and help support that. But otherwise, I think it's really okay to look in different communities. I mean, that's part of the reason we're trying to match different families who struggle or who know the same issues, or because sometimes other families can help. Other families that are experiencing similar things can actually be supports to each other. Maybe neighbors can help, and that's going to come up in a video. So, but I tend to I mean, I think it's really important to listen to families, to listen to parents and say, what is it about your family members that you feel like you can't approach them? And really honor what they're saying, because when you've been hurt, if you can help heal that hurt, if you're someone who can kind of stand in and do some mediation and can help with that, that's great. But there are family members who have been historically quite awful. I'll actually tell you, in my family, years and years ago when I was adopted, there were family members that wouldn't talk to my parents because they adopted. And that still happens not infrequently. So sometimes family cuts you off when you adopt, or when you have a child that they see as a bad child or a problem child. And we don't actually want to invite those people in, because they're probably going to cause more problems than help. Would you say the same thing, Maud?
Yes, as an adoptive parent, I can tell you, not everyone understands and will be a good supporter. And I think, so, and I just answered quite a few questions that is kind of like along the same line. How do you do that? Like we've heard recently, like a lot of CAS, child protection agencies saying, okay, let's do that. Like, I think they understood that that's really important. But what we've been hearing from families is that they don't want CAS to do it. That's kind of like adding to the shame. They're like, I don't want CAS to call my friends and say that I can't handle my child. That's how yeah, that's the feeling. I understand what they're saying. So I wonder, even though CS does have like some people that's their job, I wonder if for some AFCCA cases, they could partner with another organization to help them do that, like either us, like the RPL, could that be an FASD worker, and say, here, can we collaborate and do this? And then by being in a support group as well, they hear about what other families have been doing. And sometimes it's even increasing their presence by, let's say the child goes to the library quite often, talking to the people at the library, and sometimes that, build a new relationship. They can only have like little things sometimes that they do. Like even someone was like, my hairdresser, we've been seeing her for years. So now she's even talking to my kids about hygiene, because that's a big issue for them. And like doing that teaching. So it's not like, a weekend of respite. Is just adding to some of it's kind of like rebalancing the scales. You're taking something off the parent scale for a little bit, right? And I think okay. And so for families who are adopting and fostering, I think this aspect, like we're still recommending the same trainings that people get, usually like pathways to permanency, pride, and all that. I think, and we're also both trained in DDP. We love DDP as well, but I think what we're suggesting that might be different than what we used to suggest is once making sure they have that supportive network before they foster or adopt. When I adopted, my adoptions are 8 and 11 years ago now, but I was told, well, even I think I was recommending that to myself, is like, okay, you do it. Like, you take care of the children. You have to build attachment. And I was, even though I had friends and families, I was not letting people support me enough or support my children with the idea that, okay, we will build attachment. Some of them were in an orphanage, so they need to attach to me, but we get burned and sometimes traumatized. So we need to make sure, no, it's okay to let people in. It's okay to let them help you either through meals, going out, having self-restorative time, even develop a relationship with the child, maybe less at the beginning, so it's not in the way of the attachment, but it is important to have those relationships and support, I think, early on. So I think that's basically what we would recommend that we do differently. I don't know if I'm missing something, Tanya.
No, I think that's right. I think when I'm supporting in my private practice, if I'm supporting people who are adopting, the first most important thing I ask is that they have a support network. because it is not possible to do this alone. I just don't believe that anymore. I think you absolutely have to have a supportive community and I think doing that before is incredibly important. And you're constantly having to review, are there people I need to kind of let out of this network because they're not being helpful, and are there people I can invite into this network? I think that's incredibly important, probably. And what I think we both know now, 6 months in, this is the biggest thing that we're focused on most often, is how do we increase the supporter, the supporters in a family's life. Yeah. Oh, here's a video. This is great. This is our wonderful Jen talking about just this thing.
Hi there, my name is Jen and I am an Ontario mother of 6. 4 of my children are adopted, and I have several children who are neurodivergent and have significant needs. I know that if you're watching this video, you likely have experienced many of the same things I've experienced as a parent, and I wanted to chat a little bit today about the importance of building a network of supporters for yourself as a caregiver. So from one caregiver to another, I wanted to share a few things in building this network for me that have worked and some things that have not. Okay, I had to switch to my comfy chair for this next part because I just wanted to get real with you all, and I wanted to talk about the issue of asking for help. If you're like me, I know many of us as adoptive kin or customary care parents are the same in that we are afraid to ask for help. We don't want to inconvenience others. And a lot of times when we have reached out to ask for help, we've been denied the help we need. And it's a very isolating experience to be in that boat, and it makes you want to give up. So you might be watching this thinking, I've tried all this, I've tried to get the support I need, and I haven't been able to get it. Please hang in there and keep watching, because I hope there's some tips here that can help you. So what I would love for you to do is maybe even right now while you're watching this video, or later, it doesn't matter, to get out a piece of paper and physically draw on it who you would like to invite into your circle of support. So for me, this might look different for lots of people. Some people like to draw bubbles or one big circle. For me, it meant drawing a circle and really thinking and getting creative on there, what I needed help with and who I was going to turn to for that help. You might get stuck. I got stuck at first and couldn't even think of a single person outside of my immediate family. So don't be worried if you get stuck. It may take you some time. You might have to ask somebody else to help you think of supporters. First, you're going to list people on there that would be available at the snap of a finger by phone or text. So this doesn't have to be somebody who lives close by. This could be somebody who lives hours away, but it's literally somebody you can call when you're in a crisis to help either talk you through it, or just from a practical side. Say grandma lives a province away from you, but you know that if you call grandma and put her on speakerphone, somehow that automatically de-escalates your child. Sometimes your child doesn't want anybody else hearing them being aggressive. So if they know speakerphone is on, the aggression comes down. The next thing I did was list a couple people that would be available to me physically. Is there a neighbor who would be understanding if you explained your situation that, hey, if I text you, I need help now, could you just come over and just walk right in the door? So they might just come over, walk in the door with an excuse. Maybe they'd say, hey, I need to borrow a gallon of milk. And sometimes that's just enough to get somebody else in the room, and it surprises your child and it gets them to stop, or it helps to get you into a safe place, because adding another adult into the room who's going to support you as a caregiver is incredibly important. If you don't have a neighbor, this might be a family member that lives close by. It could even be something as simple as a school teacher or an EA in the community that your child is kind of jived with and your family respects. So those are kind of your emergency supports. And then you want to broaden from there. You as a caregiver, you're not going to be able to really thrive or survive unless you have time really to have a break from your child and your family. So you're going to need to have supporters in your circle who are going to be available for you to take over so that you can get away and restore yourself. This could be a really trusted babysitter or perhaps a child and youth worker who can come in and offer you some respite. Maybe it's a camp in your community, a church organization, a before and after school program, just as many outside village supports as you can get to schedule into your calendar regularly, daily, weekly, monthly, that you can get away and restore so that you are able to come back and return to your child rested and just feeling internally strong. I want to put a little caveat in here, and that is to be selective and careful. You want people on there that support both your child and you as the caregiver. It's surprising how many people you will ask for help will come in and be very supportive for your child. They'll try to be your child's BFF, and they won't support you as much as the parent. And then what ends up happening is they drive a wedge between you and your child and the attachment you are trying to build together. And this isn't just family and friends who can do this. There are professionals, there are therapists who do this as well. So be really careful and selective, and make sure you are choosing people in your village that are going to, yes, connect with your child and be there for your child, but that are always going to keep directing your child back to you as the caregiver, reinforcing the bond. Once I figured out that my circle needed to be full of those types of people who also valued me as a person, that made me feel like I didn't need to be a doormat, all of a sudden things got a lot better in my ability to parent my children, in my ability to have healthy boundaries for myself, to take care of myself. And please know that even if you're in a really desperate situation right now and you don't feel like you have help, you don't feel like you have anybody you can turn to for support, there are people out there that want to help. It could just be too, you've maybe asked them for help, but they didn't know how. So be specific. Tell them exactly what you need them to say in scenario A, B, and C. And you'll be surprised at how many people actually do really want to be there for you. So I hope there was something here in this video that's helpful to you. I wish you well, and I hope you're taking good care of yourself. Thanks, guys. Bye.
It's hard not to absolutely love working with Jen, and we're developing a number of videos like this to help support our families, and I think that Jen is just a really, really strong communicator on some of these, and she's lived it. She knows. So this is that strength of the parent-to-parent support model. Oops, give me my computer a second to catch up again. There we go. Mode.
Yes, and just to go back to one question that Vicky asked, she's saying that what I hear from care providers is that the rules around confidentiality and the checks and so on also get in the way of their support network being able to wrap around the kids in the home. A systemic barrier that should be addressed, and thank you for pointing that out. That's very true. One way around it is to not talk about the child's history, but the child's needs. So for example, would you go with that child and do this for me? Here's the kind of supervision he or she needs, right? And just talking in terms of needs and not necessarily the child's history. And sometimes we're not able, for multiple reasons, to put support around the child themselves, but around the family, the siblings, or around the parents, the caregivers. That's another way around it, or just build practical supports like making sure we visit, we text, we call, we go out with siblings, bring meals, anything like that could be of any help. So there's two patterns of escalation, and that's from NVR. And we're learning how to de-escalate with the neuro de-escalation. But one thing that we certainly see in families who experience AFCCA, the pattern 2, giving in escalation, means, let's say the child escalates, starts being aggressive, and then by fear of what that could lead to in terms of emotional or physical injury, or the property being destroyed, things getting thrown, then the parent will give in to the demands. They'll be like, okay, finally, like, let's just do this. You know, they want the child to calm down. And sometimes that's a pattern that happens over time. So then the child gains more and more control over this house rules, the boundaries, anything that happens, you know, in the home. And the joint escalation, that's pretty clear. It's when the parent starts to escalate as well, emotionally, physically, shouting. And sometimes, you know, it's not just the parent and the child. Sometimes it's another child that might join in, or, you know, and get into the escalation, or sometimes it's the other parent. So let's say you have one parent in the kitchen, and then they start to try to de-escalate the situation, but then there's name calling. The other parent overhears what's happening. They join in de-escalation because they think, oh no, you know, he or she's gonna give in now. And so, you know, these are patterns, and we're trying to observe with the parents, like, okay, not observe physically, but like kind of like analyze, okay, what are some of my patterns, and what I can do to change those patterns, and neither join in the escalation or given the escalation. I felt like you wanted to say something, Tanya. Sorry.
Nope,
okay, you can switch to the,
Sure, there we
other
go.
one.
Okay.
I misread your nonverbal.
Yeah, don't read them too hard. This is not a face that, anyway. It's been quite an interesting morning. So I just wanted to kind of just talk a little bit about just some specific strategies that we're finding helpful. So some de-escalation co-regulation strategies. One is the creating a safety plan. So helping families create a very specific safety plan when things are calm. We're developing resources to help parents do that for themselves. We're kind of going with the idea that parents can come up with it, but we might need to help co-regulate them so they can think through it better. And we're certainly willing to help with ideas too, because we've got some experience, but I think that's something that a lot of us can help with. One of the big things, a lot of our kids are slow processors, but realistically, all of us, when we're stressed out, our processing slows down. So learning to slow down and ground ourselves when we're talking has a big, profound effect, so that our kids remember that perspective. They might mess up perspective because they're not hearing everything that's being said. I talk in my private practice to kids. I frequently ask, do people talk too fast? And so many of my kids say yes. So just actually learning, it's super unnatural. We are a fast talking society. And when we escalate, our talking speeds up. There's an urgency in escalation that makes us speed up. If we can learn to pause and slow down, in fact, in most urgent situations, the urgency is artificial. We actually, if we pause, we'll do a much better job of thinking through what's going on, but also slowing down the escalation and keeping more control of ourselves. But I really would love to tell absolutely everyone that when they're talking to the kids we talk to, slow down your words and simplify what you're saying. And more kids will actually hear what you're saying. And the third one is about matching intensity and not emotion. Matching intensity means, actually, I love this personal example. Years ago, I had something called Graves' disease, which was hyperthyroidism at first. And I went through about 4 months of having a resting heart rate of 140. I was a walking panic attack. It's a total physiological thing. I had no control over it. That resting heart rate meant I was lying in bed with a heart rate of 140. When I got up, it just went up. I was actually doing my practicum for my master's at the time, and one of my colleagues who was in my practicum group was a yoga expert, calmest human being I've ever met. And I hated being around her because I felt like she didn't get it. She was too calm. When we've been taught often to be calm when our kids are escalating, and they'll match our calmness, but actually that's not a good statement. What we need to do is be in control, but actual co-regulation means meeting someone where they're at and then regulating them down from there. So it might mean talking intensely. It might mean just looking. If we can feel the intensity in our bodies, it will display to them. They will get that we're seeing the urgency of the situation that they're feeling. And then if we can bring ourselves back down, they were more likely to follow us down. So that's a really, really valuable trick. For some people, you might be able to say, oh my gosh, I see this is really, really, really important to you, or I really messed up somewhere. Let's see if we can fix this together. That's not a natural thing for everyone to do. So you might just need to do that with your face, with your body language, and then relax your body. There's a lot of ways to match intensity. Call on supporters like Jen was saying in that video. And that distracting or nourishing. In one of our role plays when we were doing our training, it was really fun because one of the people who was role playing an escalating child was working with a man who was teaching us, and he suddenly went, let's go get a grilled cheese. And she said in that moment, it so completely interrupted what was going on in her brain because it was such a left field suggestion. It was a lovely suggestion. It was a connecting suggestion. But it was so out of left field that it totally interrupted what was happening in her escalation, and it kind of brought her down. So there's a lot of distracting and nourishing, connecting but distracting methods that you can it takes a lot of creativity, and that's the tricky bit that we're still learning. The biggest thing too, though, that's an NVR principle is strike when the iron is cold. We don't ever try to teach, try to instruct, try to do anything but de-escalate and give space when escalation is happening. Creating physical and emotional safety is it. Lessons, anything else has to happen when the iron is cold. And that might be in a couple of days. So trying to fix things in the moment or teach a lesson in the moment is never a good thing to do. And I think that's actually important to remember with parents. If parents are escalated when you're working with them, it's most important to create safety in your relationship with them. And it feels inefficient because it feels like we want to get our message out. But if we're getting a message and someone's too escalated to hear it, that's more inefficient. Creating connection and creating safety will matter. And that just might be validating. Oh my gosh, this is so hard for you. Even being here with me must be so hard for you. Having to ask for help is such a difficult thing. Living with AFCCA is so intense. Validating all of that will immediately create safety. We have another video. So this is a lovely, It Takes a Village, and a little bit shorter. So here we go.
Hi, my name is Joseph. I grew up with my uncle who kind of adopted me. I grew up in Uganda, and I lived in Uganda until I was 22 years old. And then I moved to Japan. That's where I met my wife. So, and then we moved to Canada, and life has been good. My uncle grew up in our family. And then when my dad passed away, I was like 2 years old, so I don't really remember. And my uncle ended up doing well, so he kind of provided that father figure, both as financially and as a figure who could guide me, who I could look up to as my father, right? Okay, and now it's really interesting because, I feel like the cards have rolled. I'm kind of in that position of an adoptive uncle. I have nieces and nephews who were adopted, so it's kind of neat to look at it that way. So growing up in Uganda, I grew up in a small village called Kagoma, and everybody knows everybody. So I didn't feel like my mom was my only mom, or I didn't feel like I did not have a father. Obviously, my uncle was a big factor in my upbringing. But as an entire village, they play a really big role in raising you up if they caught you doing something you're not supposed to do, they will discipline you, right? Which is a little bit different here. And yeah, that would be okay. So yeah, that's kind of, how it is in Uganda is, yeah, you have to respect your elders and you always feel like they are looking out for your best. I feel like here the system is not as supportive, right? The parents are the sole authority, which is very different in Africa. It's the village which is actually raising you up, right? Mm-hmm. So you never feel like you're alone. You never feel like you're an orphan. You always feel like you're part of a family, right? For me, it was my mom and my cousins and my uncle. I never felt like I missed a father. Whereas here, I feel like you can't say so much. You cannot correct somebody's kid. And it's kind of a touchy subject, even when the kids are not behaving the way they should. You can't really, it's so difficult to address that with the parents. They can be sensitive or, yeah, I feel like here you have to be very careful when you kind of address somebody's kids' behaviors, which makes parenting a little hard, right? Yeah, so that's kind of my observation, but also comes with advantages and disadvantages. So I think sometimes as adoptive parents, you feel like you're not getting anywhere. So, but the fruits really come later on in a kid's life when they grow up and, they interact with the world. They find out how blessed they were, how good their parents were, and they were like basically looking out for their interests. That's what I've come to realize and, be appreciative of my upbringing. But it didn't go so well. I did not take it so well when I was growing up. I felt like I was being punished for, not having a father. Nobody could put me in trouble, But it actually worked out well for me. So, yeah, I think the message for me to adoptive parents is, even though the results may not come in a year or two, I think eventually you're moving a needle and you're changing a life and you're making their lives a little bit better, right? With the life and the love you're pouring into these kids. And obviously, I'm a living example. I'm a testimony myself.
Okay. So yeah, that I think that again, it speaks to that value that we have that is countercultural in Canada of it really does take a village and we're trying to create better villages. So in practice, I just want to describe what this looks like in our program in Adopt for Life. So if you think about the family that the case study that I talked about earlier, once a family would acknowledge that there is AFCCA in their family, there would be an intake. An RPL, the regional parent liaison, would do an intake with them, get all their information. They would kind of be identified as an AFCCA family. We would look for the practical supports, try to get them involved, make sure that they have the financial support they might need, respite support, those sorts of things. We would offer them places in our, there are closed Facebook groups, so our AFCCA closed Facebook group, so they could be seeing other stories, other people talking, asking questions. We would also offer the parent-to-parent support groups, AFCCA support group. That's a drop-in group that is led by the RPLs, like Jen helps lead one or two. Then we would also try to work on whether they need a safety plan, and we're still working that out. That's really complicated. It's pretty hard to create safety plans for 400 families. So we're working out how to do that as effectively as we can. Then if things are getting more intense or we recognize that it's a higher level in that level system, we would invite them into one of the closed clinician-led polyvagal groups. Those are the groups that I lead, and Jen co-leads them with me. And so that's a 6-week or 6-session closed group. And so that works really well because it's all families that are experiencing intense AFCCA, and those have been quite good. we start introducing some of the neuro de-escalation techniques, and I'm starting to kind of introduce some of the NVR principles in the polyvagal group, because once they've gone through the polyvagal group, if they're able to and they want to, we're now starting our NVR intervention. And what that looks like is we ask that if there are two parents, we ask both parents attend. And we also ask that they commit to coming to all of the groups. We have 6 group sessions that are bi-weekly. And then in between, we have one-to-one sessions with either Mode or myself with a clinician to kind of support what they're learning in the groups and trying to help them implement it in their family. So we have one at the beginning and then the 6 groups and interspersed. It ends up being a 13-week commitment. So it's a pretty big commitment by a family. And then we've just completed our first group of NVR. And we are now working on sort of how can we have a follow-up support. And that will probably be through either Facebook. We're kind of putting the final touches on how to have a grad sort of place for people who've been through that group to continue their learning and their support of each other. That we'll be interacting with them through that. So that's how things are looking so far in the 6 months since we started the program. This is what we've developed. And I think what I hear, and I think we just had our last group of the first NVR group, and what people were saying, I mean, their lives are still far from simple, but what they're saying is they feel more empowered. They feel like they know how to say no. They can say no again. They've got something, they kind of know how to do this. They've regained some of their values. They are maybe not over accommodating for some of the special needs that they might have been doing before. So there's just that shift to empowerment again. And we're hopeful that as it keeps developing and we get better at this, but also as they keep supporting each other, they'll get more confident in the kind of shift of how to do this parenting. Mode, this one's yours.
I was like, oh, okay, possible outcomes. You covered that a little bit, like they have better boundaries. I think I'm gonna give it some examples of what we've been seeing, and I did a pilot prior to this program. So what families have shared, some of them, they're still experiencing AFCCA in the home. For some, it had been reduced quite significantly, and for others, it's still happening. Some of them said now somehow my child feels like they can talk to me, like they will share about their life more with their parents. Some of the parents, for example, they were the child whenever was asking for food, drinks, would just name call and say, you bring me this, and now they're able to say no, and or use humor to say that they need to ask nicely. And so they were saying yes before because that would just lead to a major blowout, and they're like, no, I'm not going to do that this evening. So they felt more empowered to not give in, set some boundaries, some ground rules. They felt more competent and connected because now they have supporters, people who say, no, you know what, you are a good parent, I'm here for you. We managed to rebalance the scale for some of them, so they just feel more competent and just feel like they're not alone in this. Like, okay, there's other families going through this that are extremely competent, and I think they see that in the group too. Like, other people are smart, competent people who are going through this, difficult thing. A lot of them change in the way they're talking about their families, talking about their life. Sometimes it's very negative. They're lacking hope, and that narrative changes. Like, this is what I hope for my child. This is what I'm seeing for the future. And that narrative becomes a lot more empowering and hopeful. And many of them, and I think that the biggest one, when you're thinking of polyvagal and NVR, it's like the parent being able to self-regulate. whenever they see their partner escalating, even towards the child, and go like make a good decision of, do I join in or do I back away? How can I be a support for my partner? When they see the child escalating, being able to ground themselves, and they have those skills. And a lot of them, instead of staying mad for like 3 days after an incident, they're more able to repair or recover from the incident a lot quicker. And that's a big part of polyvagal theory.
I think we kind of need to, I'm going to keep moving just because we're starting to run out of time. I
Yes.
wanted to bring this up. This is really important because we've heard this so many times. The strength-based approach that has really become the norm in a lot of our support systems, there's a lot of really great things about it. I'm going to say this in a strength-based approach way. But when you have a family with where you're supporting children with invisible disabilities or with aggression or with aggression, you are dealing with parents who have literally spent years trying to teach people and advocate and show people, like, a lot of kids with invisible disabilities are able to appear typical for a short period of time. And so they can mask what's going on very easily. And when for a parent, it means that your role is, I'm constantly advocating, I'm constantly arguing, I'm constantly pointing out to you what's wrong with my child, which is a yucky thing for a parent to have to do. And what they get back often is a sense of, you can't be right. You don't understand your own child. Here, let me tell you how this really is. And so they get this real fear of being being criticized, and also a fear that the professionals around them involved with their children are overestimating what their child can do. That wrong, sorry. And they're not recognizing the problem that their child needs help with. And so when they hear a professional, I'll give you an example, someone who needed to go for an assessment, and they went to the psychologist, and I could tell you they were terrified to go to this assessment, because what they were afraid of was that the assessment would show that their child was typical. And then all the things that they thought they were seeing, it would mean they were wrong. So it's a really vulnerable and scary thing for parents anyway. But then when they went for the first day, the psychologist said, "Oh, your child is lovely, really enjoyed them. They are so sweet to be around." And that just totally overwhelmed the parent and made them think, "Oh my gosh, you don't get it. Here we go again." So when we just say that, that actually becomes really problematic for parents. They've also heard a lot of things about the aggression, like, "Oh, that's just how boys are," or "They'll grow out of it," or the opposite of "They're a bad kid." So again, these are parents who are constantly advocating and fighting, feeling like they're fighting systems and people all around them, which is exhausting. So what I want to ask you to please consider is definitely say, I see your child's strengths. Notice them, look for the child's strengths, absolutely important. Look for the parent's strengths too, but also validate, I see how difficult your struggle may be. Look for, where is the struggle? Why is this difficult? Use that empathy piece. Our parents desperately need that. They need to be met. They are so thrilled and so relieved when they feel like someone gets it. Mode.
Language. So I talked about it throughout the presentation, and what does that mean? I'm sure you've seen it for other conditions like fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. We try to say, we don't say, "Oh, this person suffers from FASD," right? We say they're impacted by FASD, just to be respectful. So same with AFCCA, we try to use the word AFCCA instead of saying the aggressive child. For example, you may have heard throughout the presentation, sometimes we say children who display AFCCA, or display aggression. Something else that we want to talk about is the word abandonment. And so at CAS, a lot of the families that we see that are level 3 are involved with with Children's Aid, and we know it's in the system. You know, they would say, okay, this ticks the box for abandonment, because if the parents are saying the child cannot return home due to safety concerns, because they're being hit every day, there's other children in the home, and then we know there's a lack of available therapeutic homes for these young people. So they would say, well, this is called abandonment. That's how they call, like, the risk of separation, and that's a huge trigger for families. Most of them want to keep their parental rights, but some of them are not able to have the child in their home anymore for a while, for longer than 3 months TCA, for example. So we try to talk to Children's Aid sometimes to say, whenever you can, sometimes we understand it's in the system, but whenever you're talking to the parent, to not use the word abandonment, because they don't get to that place of saying, I need the child out of my home. They do this out of desperation, out of needing to protect their own physical safety. Sometimes it's a matter of life and death, like we've seen it.
And actually, sometimes it's a matter of protecting their child. Sometimes they feel like their child will have better protection in the system than in their home, because in their home, they don't feel like they can give their child what they need. So it's actually the opposite of abandonment.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you, Tanya. And always talking about aggression or AFCCA in the context of the complexity of children. And we don't want to further stigmatize the children that have been through foster care, who have attachment issues and neurodevelopmental complexity. We always want to put it in a context of AFCCA and the multiple complexities. And also remembering of validating the experience of parents, their tenacity as parents, how hard the journey has been, and validating their competence and the fear they may experience too as parents. Do we have?
Yeah, I think we're just put done. I guess the only other thing, well, we're going to show you some more things that we're doing, or the Adopt for Life is doing. But the other thing that we just were noticing as we're doing our job, and I think this is a function of COVID, and also maybe political forces that aren't as supportive as we need them to be. But there is a lot of lack of creativity in our systems, because our systems are tired. Our people are tired. Our systems are a bit overwhelmed. But these are cases that need creativity, and they need collaboration. We have been able to identify a number of clear needs. Things like, how can we have a co-parenting model with a bigger framework than just the nuclear family? We want the systems to become solution focused. I said last time I did this, a long time ago, I took improv theater very briefly for good reasons. The briefness was for good reasons. But one of the rules in improv theater is no blocking. It's about not saying no, and instead saying, okay, how can we do this? This is difficult. It doesn't fit our framework, but maybe we can find a way around things. We need that kind of creativity with these situations. I just had something that I wanted to say, and it just flipped out of my head as fast as it came in. We are creating a community of practice. So people who are professionals that want to be involved, I think we all see this problem now. You're here because you know this problem exists. And so we're creating a community of practice so we can start sharing ideas and creating a willpower to create change in the systems that really need some change. So I think I'll go with that for now. The other thing comes up. These are just some of the groups that we're doing. So AFCCA 101. These are workshops that are available. Yeah, workshops that are available. So if you want to book any of them, the information on booking those. So that's something that Adopt for Life offers. These are webinars. This is one of them. There is another group that's coming up soon, the webinar, how to support escalation and regulation. Nate Sheets is someone that we really enjoy. He's got lots of great videos. So that might be of interest for you or people that you support. This group is going on. It was a support group specifically for fathers or people who identify as fathers. because their experience is often different. And this is another thing, FASD and me, these are downloadable workshops that can be used for kids to be able to self-advocate, or parents to be able to give to like their support network. This is who my child is, and these are the needs, these are their strengths. It's an excellent resource. And this is how you can stay connected. So I'm going to pass this back to Catherine.
I'm here. Thank you so much, ladies. I know there was probably another hour and a half that we could go on about this, and I personally could listen to it forever, but we are going to open up the Q&A. I do know we are limited for time, but we will, I know Tanya and Maud have been answering as we go. As we do open to the Q&A, I do also just want to let you know that as you end this webinar, as you click the leave button, you will be prompted to complete, oh, there I am. You will be prompted to complete a survey. This survey is very, very imperative to the AFCCA supports program. It's needed in order for program development as well as research purposes. So we're going to ask if you can please complete the survey. We'll also be emailing this out to you. All of the resources shared today, you will get a copy of emailed in a few days as well. So I know you guys have been answering questions as we go, so we can wait a minute to see if there's any other questions that come. And also, if you are watching this on the recording or on replay and you do have a question, please feel free to email the AFCCA support team at AFCCA there's no S, at adoptforlife.com, and you can absolutely ask this. If any of the resources shared you are interested specifically in, or becoming a member of a registered professional with Adopt for Life, that's something that you can email the team as well. I will wait a minute before I turn us out, just in case. I don't know if you guys can see the chat, but there's just a lot of thanks and appreciation coming. I learn so much every time that we do these.
Yes, and for people who are still here, we will send a survey with the PowerPoint. Please fill it out. We have been sending it. We would like to have more responses so we know how to improve those webinars and meet the community's needs in that regard. So please fill out the survey. It's super short, like 2 minutes.
It is, but it's very impactful.
Yes.
Okay, so with that said, I don't see any other Q&As. I want to thank you both so much for all of your wealth of knowledge, and for continuing to share with the community and help building supports for all of us. And for all of you who attended, thank you so much for being engaged. If you do have questions afterwards, AFCCA support at adoptforlife.com is the place you go, or you can go to www.adoptforlife.com and search under AFCCA, and all of these amazing resources will be there as well. We hope you have a great day, and let's remain connected so that we can continue to support the families that we care for. Take care. Bye.
Bye.